Welcome in. You're listening to Medical Spa Insider, presented by the American Med Spa Association. We are happy to have you with us. This week, AmSpa founder Alex Tiersch welcomes David Segal and Dr. Jake Sloane from the Inside Aesthetics podcast to discuss the spread of the medical aesthetics industry, including into their home country of Australia, and what the future might hold for the field. And if you want to make your aesthetics career future-proof, learn about AmSpa member benefits at americanmedspa.org/benefits.
All right, everybody, welcome to the program. We have, from the other side of the world, good morning to Dr. Jake Sloane and David Segal from Australia. Again, this I think it's the second guest we've had from Australia here. We had the folks from Fresh Clinics when we were at the Medical Spa show, and it's like I'm telling you, it's the Australian invasion. It's awesome to have you guys. Just for those of you who don't know, Dr. Jake Sloane and David Segal both are on Inside Aesthetics. Inside Aesthetics has really become, for those of you who haven't heard about it, it's a podcast, obviously based in Australia, but it's got a huge following, and it's an incredible source of resources and information for those of you who want to learn about aesthetics. And they've, I was on their podcast not too long ago. It's probably maybe 3 months or so. And we dove into a new resource, a new app that you all were launching, that brought some of these resources to folks so that they could actually do, I think, online training, things like that. And we'll get into that again to make sure that everyone knows what you're doing, which I thought was really cool. And we had a great conversation and talked a lot about the market in Australia and how it's kind of been, moving. There's a lot of players from Australia moving over here into the United States. The market in Australia is a lot more mature, but it's different. So there's a lot of parallels, but it's certainly not exactly the same. But I think there's a lot we can learn from it. And talking to both of you was very fascinating, both because you've had a ton of experience from the business side, kind of going through things that we're currently going through right now in terms of legislation. There's a lot of choppiness in our market as far as folks trying to figure out what they can and cannot do. Some of the regulators and legislators are trying their best to wrap their minds around how to govern some of the things that we're working on. And y'all have been through that yourself a while ago. You also went through a large round of consolidation with private equity, including some of the private equity groups that are here in the States that are involved. And so it's really been an interesting kind of foreshadowing, back to the future type of thing, where we're getting to see what's going on in the future. Before we get into all that, though, I would love to just say welcome to both of you. I appreciate you getting up early and talking with us. How are things in Australia? What's the latest? Welcome.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for the intro. It's a pleasure to be here. As you said, we really enjoyed having you on our podcast a few months ago and finding out about all the great things that you guys are doing over there in the States with AmSpa and, the services that your company is providing to help give, as you said, folks, some guidance on how to run their businesses compliantly and do it the right way. Because, as you correctly said, it's a bit of the Wild West still. The industry's kind of grown so quickly out of nowhere, and I think we're all trying to just catch up and work out how do we do it in the best way. So just, I guess, my background, I'm a business person. So I owned clinics in the space for 20 years in various different iterations, from surgical to non-surgical. When I got involved, the industry was really in its infancy. Jake and I have been doing the podcast for nearly 8 years now, 7.5 to 8 years. We met at one of my businesses, which was kind of like my last chapter of being a clinic owner, and Jake was working with me. He'll tell you all about himself in a second, but we kind of formed this podcast together because we saw a huge, I guess, knowledge vacuum, because the industry was moving so quickly, and new products, new devices, social media, people not knowing what was a good source of truth. And that was the void that we tried to fill. And then, the podcast has just sort of grown from there. But maybe Jake, tell us about yourself.
Well, hey guys, I'm Jake. If you're listening and not watching this, I'm the clinician out of the two of us. So I'm an aesthetic doctor. My background was general surgery, but I've been doing full-time facial aesthetics since 2017, and that's how I met this guy. He's working at his clinic, and since then we've obviously become known for the podcast, and we've got a nice big international following, which is great, because then we get to learn from our guests and even our audience and people who we meet when we go on our travels. So it's really nice for us to learn, as well as, I guess, to share. And most recently we launched our app called IA Community about 25 days
Yeah,
ago, not even
very
a month
recent.
ago. And the idea of the app that hopefully your audience might be interested in is really to help build a community, somewhere where people can actually connect, learn, talk, share, sort of get some help, because a lot of people are doing this alone, solo, especially running a business. It's incredibly difficult. Most of us are clinicians and we don't understand laws, regulations, and obviously, business models. So David's leaned heavily into that, especially on the app. And, I sort of provide some of the clinical stuff, but really it's about community and connection and sort of helping people evolve and move forwards in this sort of crazy game that we call aesthetics.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you're kind of leaning into a lot of the same things that we've leaned into at AmSpa. And I want to backtrack a little bit because you mentioned you met and you were both part of the same kind of clinic that was building up. And what I always found interesting about Australia, and I'm going to butcher kind of the history of this, so please correct me and just kind of make it sound
Sure.
good. But there was one of the absolute major players in Australian aesthetics was kind of like took over almost the entire market, which is very different than what it was. And I'm probably saying that wrong if they took over the entire market, but there was a huge amount of consolidation with one big company. And then maybe there was another one or two that was also there. Which is different than what we've dealt with here. What was that the company you guys were both involved with, and talk about how that developed, because I can't remember exactly which one you both were involved with.
I'll let David talk about this because he was there from the very start.
Yeah. So I think the business by the way, if anyone's noticed a slight accent difference between Jake and I, it's because he's originally from the United Kingdom. So he's not real. Oh,
I speak proper English.
You are actually in Australia now. You have the piece of paper, but that's why the accent difference. If anyone's wondering why we say, yeah.
I noticed it. It was. Go ahead. Sorry.
So for any of you, yeah, all good. So the business I think you're referring to is called Laser Clinics Australia, which was founded in around 2009, I think, was when the business was launched. And a little bit of an interesting backstory about that business. It was founded by two gentlemen, one called Bob Moyni and the other is called Alistair Champion. And those guys founded the business in 2009, but this was actually Bobak's second or third iteration of trying to launch this kind of model, and had a couple of failures, businesses going into liquidation. And then the Laser Clinics Australia model was the culmination of him learning from all those mistakes and seeing that gap in the market. But his background was actually, he was an actuary by trade, so really good at sort of risk mitigation and understanding numbers, and super bright. And he originally founded the model because he was getting laser hair removal, because he comes from an ethnic background, very hairy, and he was actually getting laser hair removal treatment done. And he goes, God, why does this have to be so expensive? So he took a photo of one of the lasers that he was getting treated with by a dermatologist, and then he contacted the company. One thing leads to another. He founds a company that essentially buys secondhand devices, repairs them, and resells them. And then he used that business model to then vertically integrate that into the Laser Clinics Australia model, because he was able to get his devices at a really good price and service them. And that was, the business was launched on basically laser hair removal. And then it grew into injectables, skin treatments, fat freezing, and all sorts of bits and pieces. But that's how it was originally founded in 2009. So it was between those two guys. It was the first of its kind. Before they existed, injectables and sort of even laser hair removal treatments, hyper expensive, very hard to find places that did it. Particularly when it came to injectables, people were not really talking about it. It was kind of very, very hush-hush. And they kind of blew the market open because they said, why does it have to be so expensive, and why do we need to be so shy about offering these procedures? And they essentially put them in shopping centers, in very sort of bright, I wouldn't use the word obnoxious, but let's go with that, like looking clinics, aggressive pricing, starting to really talk about, things like getting your cheeks done, getting your wrinkles treated, like putting all these packages together. Anyway, the business grew massively. They were the first to really bring in nurse injectors. Before, their nurse injectors only really worked in plastic surgeons' offices or in the hospital. And they were the first guys to really start using telehealth for aesthetic purposes, where doctors could provide coverage via, Zoom wasn't around back then. It might have been something else I think we were using. Anyway, so I got involved in the business and came on board as the general manager for a couple of years. before that, I had a different working for a different clinic, and my job really was to look at how we can potentially bring injectables into the business or make it more efficient. And the business just grew and grew and grew to the point where it got sold to KKR in 2017, I think it was, for 650 million Australian dollars. But it was a pretty wild ride up until that point, and it got wild after that as well. So I met Jake towards the end of my tenure when he came across from the UK and started working in the last clinic that I owned. It was a very interesting journey. But that business, I think, essentially set the benchmark for how chain clinics would operate around the world. There was nothing of its kind before, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, if I actually could add my UK kind of slant on that, because I came sort of 2015, but met David 2017 when he bought one of the clinics where I was working at. So I'd only been there a month, and then this guy bought the clinic. So that's how we became friends. And, having come from the UK, it was very similar to what you're describing before Laser Clinics Australia. It was sort of a tiny little cottage industry, lots of people doing their own thing behind sort of, hidden clinics, and it was not visible or available. So when I came here, it was a real eye-opener to me because I was still working in hospital. I moved here to train as a surgeon and continue my training. And I got, burnt out, fed up, a million reasons why I sort of didn't want to go back to hospital. But I also saw this amazing opportunity because suddenly the thing that I was doing kind of on the side in the UK was immediately available, not just to patients, but to me to work. So I kind of see Laser Clinics Australia as, kind of democratized aesthetics. It made it available, cheap, affordable. Anyone could do it, even sort of your average person with not a lot of money could start doing Botox pretty regularly. So from that perspective, it was great. But of course, since then, maybe, we can get into it, but they grew like huge, and they moved internationally, and now that hasn't gone so well. Mm-hmm. So we, potentially they sort of were at their peak then, and maybe since then, they're sort of over commoditized potentially. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because, and this is what I wanted to get at because I truly don't think that our listeners or folks in the States understand how, number one, how big Laser Clinics Australia was truly, and kind of how influential they were in, like you said, democratizing injectables, really setting the bar for how it all works. I mean, I know, largest account for Allergan for the longest time, they pretty much set the bar for injectable protocols and dealing with complications, right? A bunch of those things. I mean, a lot of the things that are happening right now were developed because of that. And it was when you talk about kind of the history of, facial aesthetics, non-surgical aesthetics, and even med spas, like there has to be, Australia is kind of a piece of it. And the chain aesthetic, chains are becoming more and more prevalent now, and there has to be some of it that's devoted to what you all did as part of that. And I'm saying all this because both of you had kind of a real view into the business building side of before any of us were really even paying attention to how to do it on the micro level, how to really run an aesthetics injectable business. You were kind of helping invent that and scale it at a level that most of us don't understand. And it's valuable for all of us to kind of realize just where you've come from. And a lot of the things that we're dealing with are directly born out of that chain. I also think there's maybe some lessons in light of what's happened to them now, and maybe a quick story before we jump into what you guys have been doing as a result of that, because I think where you guys are now is phenomenal. I want to talk about that, but what's kind of the end story? I'll let you respond to what I said too.
Okay, the end story with KKR and laser clinics, you mean?
Yeah, I'm curious because it's kind of a telling prophecy.
Yeah. Well, I think it's and Phil, to jump in whenever you want, Jake. I think that to understand where we're at now, we need to probably get an understanding of like what private equity is, what their MO or modus operandi is, and how that kind of intersects with the aesthetics market. So private equity, for your listeners that don't know, essentially, as the name would infer, private funds that can come from individuals or things like super funds, or I think you call them 401ks over in the United States.
Oh.
It's essentially money that's not from a bank. It's a private accumulation of wealth, and these companies come along and raise what they call a fund, and they'll get all these different investors to give them money, and they want to promise them like a return, like X amount of return on their money. Let's call it 20%, for example. Okay.
Yeah.
And then they'll go out and buy a whole lot of businesses, and then within a certain amount of time, they want to turn those businesses over and give their money back to their investors, give them their profit, move along and do it again and take their cut on the way through. That's, like, I guess, a very obtuse way of explaining what they're doing, right? So they're not holding these businesses in the long term. They're short-term acquisitions. And so what happened when a large private equity firm like KKR came and bought LCA, in this industry, there was lots of things happening at the same time. The industry was moving quickly, maturing, consolidating on its own anyway. The regulators were starting to wake up because, there were starting to be negative news stories, adverse events, people inevitably doing dodgy things that were starting to get their attention, more competition. So fresh clinics came along towards the end of that sort of period of time and started saying, hey, well, you don't need to work in a chain clinic. You can open up your own business. So there are all these factors sort of going on at the same time, plus, weird economic headwinds, things changing. We've had a really good, nice little Goldilocks period of, cheap money and everyone doing well. And then that, all these cycles tend to come to an end. So we had a lot of things sort of converging at the same time. And then you've got a private equity firm buying a large company, and they want to hold this business for the short term, make their money and get out. So there tends to be like a divergence from the way that, say, the founders of a business would run it, where they've got a long-term vision, there's a passion there, they're connected with the staff, the franchisees, everyone's making money. It's sort of like mutually beneficial relationship. Whereas when private equity buy a company, in a lot of instances, their interests start to diverge or divert away from like what our model was, which was like franchisees, long-term thinking. They want to come in, I guess, run that engine on the red line, try and find ways to pull profit out of the business. They don't really understand that you're not kind of selling T-shirts or biscuits. This is kind of like a personal medical service with relationships. Holding on to people for the long term is important. Making sure that you're being, I guess, beyond reproach in terms of how you're marketing yourself. And so things started to fall off the wagon, or the wheel started to come off, because there was a divergence from how the business used to be run and their aims to make their money back as quickly as possible. And that's when things started to go pear-shaped, because there was just no long-term thinking. There was no relationship there anymore. And all they cared about was making their money back. And that became really obvious, which is kind of why the business, hasn't really been the same since they took over. And in fact, I think it's gone backwards significantly. That's kind of what I think is the major problem, is just those divergent interests and decisions being made at, in boardrooms with really smart business analysts and spreadsheets. No one actually on the ground understanding this is a very relationship-based industry, where there's a lot of medical compliance, and it's not just as simple as, okay, well, we know that if we do 10 Botox treatments in a day at this much money, this is how much we're going to make. There are things that come up that are unpredictable, complications, or sometimes you need to spend longer with a patient. You can't always run things to that level of efficiency. And I think there was just a real disconnect there. But I'd be interested to know what Jake thinks, because, you kind of saw this firsthand.
Yeah, look, from the clinical perspective, that was a great summary of, like, I guess, the business and the trajectory. But from a clinical perspective, even when I first joined, and like I said, I was new here, it was a little bit weird for me that treatments were sold as packages, as advertised amounts of units or mils of filler. It was clearly designed by a businessman, not by a medical director. So It worked for many, many years because, it was cheap, affordable, it was new for patients. And I guess patients, and to some extent injectors, didn't know any better. It just worked. And it was a very volume-based business model. You needed 10 people on the bed every day. And as long as you saw 10 people and they bought a package, everyone's happy. But at some point, patients get savvier, more treatments come out. There's different brands of toxins suddenly. There's new products on the market, biostimulators, polynucleotides, et cetera, and it becomes more complicated. And so that means that consultations need to be done more effectively, longer gaps between patients. You need to spend more time with them. You need to do clinical photos. You need to do your notes, et cetera, et cetera. But the business was never really set up that way. It was sort of set up for come for 15 minutes, maybe maximum half an hour. You're in, you're out, and we see the next one a bit like a sausage factory. So as treatments have become more diversified, it just means the model had to change, and I don't think it has kept up with that, whilst at the same time trying to keep the prices as low as possible, and therefore people like David owning the clinic as a franchisee is feeling more of the squeeze.
Yeah.
And then of course we had COVID, just to throw a real spanner in the works. Clinics weren't open.
Yeah.
They weren't able to pay their rent or their mortgage or service their devices and all their costs and staff. So I'm sure for KKR that came at the most inconvenient time, where they're trying to squeeze the business as it is, and then suddenly your clinics are closed for 3, 6, 9 months.
Yeah.
It was like the turning point, I guess.
Yeah. And as you said, there was a lot of other factors. So a lot of the competition has started to catch up by then. So there are a lot of like copycat competitor models that opened up. The Fresh Clinics model had now, allowed nurses and doctors who are working within our clinics to be their own business owners. And we kind of had our hands tied because we didn't really have that next step in their career that we could offer to them. In fact, I took Jake to meet with one of the head honchos at KKR at the time and said, hey, this is one of our most skilled injectors in our network. I need a career progression plan for him. He's going to go and do something bigger and better for himself unless I can offer him something as a next stage in his career. And they just weren't interested in having those discussions. So they had a huge skill, I guess, exodus of people that were really great at their craft who left for various reasons. And then you sort of combine all those other factors, regulation, competition, patients becoming more sophisticated. It was a great model for the time, but it just didn't keep up with it. It's kind of like, and I've used this analogy on the podcast a lot, but I'll say it again because maybe your audience doesn't know about it. Depending on how old the people are listening to this, there was a company called Kodak many years ago that used to be, the biggest business when it comes to photography. So when you take a photo, it was on film, it wasn't on a digital device. And then you went and had those, photos developed, right? So the person who invented the digital photo was actually working for Kodak and came to the board and said, hey, I've got this idea for a digital photo. And they laughed at him and said, who would be interested in having a digital photo? And so it just kind of shows that like these large businesses can become extremely fixed in their ways, arrogant, not complacent. And I think that's kind of where we ended up. These guys got caught in buying a business that was at its peak, failed to read the future, or weren't interested in sort of evolving it to move with where the industry was going, and got caught with a lot of other things, COVID, regulators starting to catch up. At one point towards the end, like the running costs for my business, one of my clinics, I had 6 clinics towards the end. And the average running cost, break-even point per week on that clinic was somewhere in the order of like 30 to 35,000 Australian dollars a week. So to put that in context in US dollars, what's your conversion? Remember, like 0.6 or 0.7. Let's just call it like 15 to 20,000, probably US dollars a week, just to break even. That's how out of control the running costs were. And then that kind of led to a big dispute, which I can talk about a little bit, but myself and a couple of other people who were, I guess, legacy owners who were involved in the business very early on, basically almost at inception, who came from business backgrounds, who weren't your typical franchisee sort of avatar. We were a bit more savvy, bit of money behind us. We understood how business worked and the law to a certain extent. And when we saw what KKR had done when they bought the business, it sort of started to upset us. And then that eventually led to a huge dispute where they ended up buying out 50 clinics because we weren't happy with the way that they were running the business model. But to give you an example of the kind of things that they were doing, so we had a huge amount of laser hair removal machines in our business, and they were being used, like some of our clinics, like my busiest clinic was seeing 100 to 150 patients a day for a mixture of treatments, laser hair removal, Botox, fillers, skin treatments, etc. So a huge throughput of people. And so I had like 5 or 6 devices running all day, every day in each one of these clinics. And if one of those lasers goes down, it's a big deal. It's like a headache. Your staff are screaming, you're trying to rebook patients. It's a nightmare. And so we had service contracts, which we paid good money for to have these machines serviced whenever something went down, including weekends. One day, shortly after KK had taken over the business, one of the people in our networks had a laser that went down, tried to call the laser company, which was Candela, to come and service the machine. And they said, you guys don't have weekend servicing anymore. We had no idea. So what had happened was KKR had taken it upon themselves. I should use the word allegedly taken it upon themselves to go and remove weekend servicing from the contracts still charge us the full amount for the service fee, but collect the difference. So basically, the clinics were still paying the full whack for the service contract. KKR was still picking up that we were paying them and they were paying Candela. So they still got their money from us, but they were paying less to Candela because they'd remove weekend servicing, because they, some clever business person in in an office somewhere had said, well, we know that there's only a certain amount of lasers that break down on the weekend. If we go back to Candela and cut weekend servicing, we can make this much extra money off the service contracts. Let's do it. And made a unilateral decision without talking to any of the franchisees and what impact it would have on us. So that was kind of like the moment where we went, can I swear on this? Like, what the heck is going on? Like this, what the fuck is going on? Like, this is just not on. And that was kind of like the beginning of the end.
Yeah. No, and that I want to bring this back and through to kind of number one, what like some of the regulatory issues that we're dealing with here in America, and also what you're both doing with your app, because I think to me there's through lines you can draw, both with what types of regulations Australia had finally put together to kind of deal with some of that stuff. Because really what you're talking about, and Dr. Sloane, I guess I'll start with you on this, is that some of those issues with how you deal with kind of the sales issues of aesthetics and because it's cash pay, because you are selling in packages, and because you've got providers who are maybe not accustomed to doing things in the way that things are being done, and you have business owners on the side, sometimes in the back, who are pushing things that maybe they're not always accustomed to or always comfortable with, especially as you get this consolidation and you get private equity. You get a little bit of conflict, and then you start to, that's where you start to get some of these laws and regulations that come into place that often overcorrect. And I'm curious, based upon your experience and what you've seen as a result of what happened with KKR and Laser Clinics of Australia, maybe what's developed in Australia, what can we learn from that here in America? Because we're just now starting to really get into that. There's states like California are really cracking down on the commercial side and what private equity can do as far as controlling businesses and controlling healthcare. There's a lot of discussion about ownership and who can make decisions, and how that relates back to clinical judgment. It's a loaded question, I realize, but what's kind of reading the tea leaves can we learn from your experience here moving forward?
Well, I don't have an answer, but I'll kind of spurt out some thoughts, because we touched on this on your podcast with us. We've all done this. We stumbled into this career, including myself, including David, and I believe including you, Alex. Like, we somehow became involved in aesthetics from our various backgrounds. And it's that inception of a lack of a plan, a lack of a training pathway, a lack of regulations, a lack of a qualification, a lack of even a career pathway, where that sets the precedent for things to come unstuck before we've even started. So I can only speak from a clinician's perspective, and maybe David can sort of touch on what he saw. But, I moved from another country to here, where in the other country there were no laws at all. I mean, the UK is one of the worst cases of where things just go completely crazy. You don't need any medical qualification to inject any injectable in the UK. You could be a hairdresser and set up your own filler clinic. It's completely legal. At least here in Australia, you're a doctor, nurse, or a dentist. That's the main professions who are doing this. So by definition, it's a little bit regulated already, because there's only 3 people who can do it. But apart from that, you do your weekend course and away you go. And I'm not going to say that Laser Clinics Australia was the only example. Every clinic running here to this day, you can do that weekend course and set up tomorrow. So by definition, we've got this inverted commas specialty that isn't special, because there's no qualification or ring fencing of what that even means. So there's a lot of self-accountability as an injector. You somehow have to be sensible, understand your boundaries, your experience, what isn't right, and that definitely doesn't always work. That principle of having introspection, because we've seen it all the time, and David's worked with many injectors who didn't really understand that. Now, I was lucky working with David because I was new in the country, but he was a business owner who had got lots of experience. He wasn't a pushy manager who said, "Hey, you've got to be selling today." That there was none of that, but that definitely happens. We definitely see less experienced injectors whose boss is saying to them, "Hey, I'm only giving you 15-minute consults, and your target today is X $1,000, and I don't care if they don't need their filler. You're going to do it." Like we know that happens because it does happen. So you sort of have to have this inner medical hat on to say, well, that's not normal. Like these are patients, they're not clients. We've argued on the podcast about what's a client, what's a patient. I'm very clear that they're patients. They're people who I'm treating, even though it's elective and they're giving me money. They're still a patient. I can cause damage to them. So yeah, I don't really have an answer because globally we don't have an answer. I mean, they've tried to sort this out in Holland. We did a podcast many years ago where we touched on, I believe Holland's the only country in the world where you can actually qualify as an aesthetic doctor. And they've got a 2 or 3 year pathway. It's incredibly expensive, and you can get the title aesthetic doctor and you can put that on your door and you've got a qualification behind you. Now, everyone I've spoken to of Holland said it's bullshit because it's not mandatory and it doesn't make you any better or any worse than anyone who didn't do it. So even the one country who's tried it has said it doesn't work. And I guess the counter argument is there's, America, Australia, UK. It's not like everyone is going blind every 5 minutes. It's not like complications are, completely out of control. Now, that's not to be blasé. No complication is good, and we should always aim for 0. But I don't know if the argument's strong enough to completely change it either. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I agree with everything that you've said. I guess in terms of some of the regulation differences between here and, say, the United States. I mean, I remember the last time I was in the United States, I was, having some breakfast in front of the TV. Ad comes on for an antipsychotic. I'm like, that's interesting. We don't have. It was during a cartoon as well. So kids are seeing this stuff. So I mean, I think America and New Zealand are the only 2 countries in the world that allow sort of free reign in terms of advertising medical drugs, so scheduled medications where you can put them on the TV. There's no laws around that. Like here in Australia and most parts of the world, there is some kind of regulation around advertising of scheduled medications. So we've always had that. But a couple of years ago, we had some big laws come in, and they're sort of still evolving as we speak. But, you can't even infer like Botox. You can't say anti-wrinkle. You can't say dermal filler. So you can't put up before and after photos relating to scheduled medications on your social media. And I guess the reason the regulators did this was because it was just starting to become so aggressively marketed towards people. People were complaining about getting, sold an idea about an outcome that wasn't achievable. They were showing photos that had been, edited with Photoshop, people not sort of getting understanding of what would be a realistic outcome. And I think medicine and money have always had like an interesting relationship. I mean, I think people are always critical about money and big pharma and all that kind of stuff. I hear all those criticisms. But at the end of the day, if there wasn't money, there wouldn't be innovation. And there's always this kind of, I don't know, like this friction between money and medicine. And I think what made it even more exacerbated in our industry is that we weren't even looking at these treatments as medical. We were looking at them as just beauty treatments or spa treatments. Just getting your nails done or getting a spray tan. They're in shopping centers. You're getting your cheeks done. It's fun. And I think that's kind of where the regulators started to get concerned was we were starting to, I guess, trivialize these treatments, and it was starting to feel like it was out of control. So those are the changes that we've got now. Like there's a huge amount of restrictions on what you can and can't say, what you can put up in terms of your imagery, giving prices to patients over the phone before you've done a consultation. All of that has come to an end, and there are arguments on both sides who, think it's great, others who think that it's a travesty and it's destroying businesses. No matter which side of the fence you sit on, it has absolutely changed our industry. It has definitely made it more difficult for new entrants to come into the market because they don't have that ability to aggressively get their name out there through social media. It's a slow grind. You might not be able to open up your business straight away. Perhaps you need to go and work for someone else, build up your reputation. So it's kind of slowed down the path to immediate success, which I think was what was drawing a lot of people to this industry. And I think because of that, it's in a lot of ways attracted the wrong people people that were just going to do nursing to become injectors. They weren't interested in learning, nursing the correct way, spending time in hospital, learning how to, do a proper consult, bedside manner, like red flags, life support skills. All those things were lacking because there was this loophole. People could just sort of come in, do their degree, kind of just scrape past, do very little hospital time, and then open up their own businesses. And then to make matters worse, you had people that were new injectors who didn't know what they didn't know. They'd done their weekend course or a couple of week course, opening up their own business, trying to learn business skills at the same time, which is a whole other discipline in itself. I'm still learning, and I've been doing it for 20 years. It's a tough one. And so you had all these businesses opening up really quickly, very inexperienced practitioners, aggressive marketing, people that were, have no business skills either, that then had the compounding effect of financial pressure, needing to make money, doing consults, being pushy, doing treatments I didn't really understand. And it just became this shitstorm that I think the regulators potentially, in some people's view, overcorrected.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where we're at now. The dust is settling. Would you add anything to that? Do you think I missed anything?
I mean, I know you've had this in the States as well. Because of that lack of regulation or grayness, lack of standards and qualifications, etc., it does lead to the odd rogue actor will kind of go, oh, I'll import some Botox from wherever, and I'll start importing things that aren't supposed to be here, and I'll just give it a crack and see what happens. And eventually someone suffers for that. Someone goes blind, someone gets botulism, something happens that completely scares the whole industry, and then the regulator gets wind of it, and then they crack down. That's what's happened here, at least in Australia. I know in some American states there's been some recent legislation about some of these things, and if the window is open for these rogue actors to push the boundaries so far, someone will eventually do it, and that's why we keep on seeing this sort of feels like punitive action by a regulator. But at some point we have to sort of put a boundary around this and say, well, this is what is acceptable and this is what isn't. I mean, what do you think from the States?
No, I think we're probably at an inflection point, kind of at a very similar spot right now, where I think a lot of the regulators are trying to figure that out. Are they going to take the really hard line approach? I don't think it's not going to be quite the level that was taken in Australia, both because there's not correct me if I'm wrong, but the law you're talking about in Australia was a national law, right? Was it like a national federal law? So it was kind of applied to everybody. So that number one is going to be difficult, if not impossible, here. And the weight of the pharma lobby and their influence is such that that's probably going to be difficult to get. However, that said, we're definitely seeing pushback, and it's exactly as you said, Jake. It's botulism. It's stupid things like that. It's counterfeit Botox, and people who have no training, who are saying they're RNs, who are doing injections with counterfeit materials, and it's just it's making it tough for everybody. Now the law in Australia, was that purely just a marketing kind of representation law, or did it actually have any training proficiency requirements also? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, that's sort of the method behind the madness, is that there's still no qualification, still no standard, still no competence, still no agreed anything. It's just you can't do these things from a marketing and advertising perspective. Those were the main actual changes.
Yeah, I had some mixed feelings about this, because I thought, these laws are good, but it's actually not getting to the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is not that someone's advertising it. The problem is that there are people out there who aren't skilled, potentially don't even know that they're unconsciously incompetent doing these things. There's no kind of, as Jake said, guidelines and formalized pathway for training. That's the problem. It's not advertising, but they went down the advertising pathway, maybe because that was the easiest path the least path of resistance. It didn't require as much work from them. If they wanted to, formalize a training pathway, I'm sure that'd be a bigger task. Whereas if they could just clamp down on advertising, perhaps they could commercially slow things down and sort of achieve it in a different way. But as Jake said, it doesn't get to the root cause of the problem.
I mean, I should say, and I could be wrong in this, but it's not up to our sort of regulator of doctors and nurses to actually tell us how to train. That's up to our training colleges and the surgical colleges and whoever run actual training. It's not up to our regulator who deals with sort of the more, general standards of doctors to tell us how to train. So maybe that's why they didn't do it. I don't know whose job it is to sort out injectables, because there isn't an injectable college, or you don't learn this stuff in medical school. So it's kind of this weird outlier where it's like a skill that you learn postgraduate where you don't even do that in medical school or nursing school. Yeah.
That's I mean, that is kind of, at the root of everything, is when you kind of go through it. There's no board certification. There's no fellowship really that you can get, formal fellowship. There's no, even the nursing schools and if you go to nurse practitioner, get your certification, there's no way to fit it in under aesthetics. And I think we're seeing now, you mentioned this earlier, a lot of providers are trying to go right from, whether it's nursing school or PA school or NP school, directly into aesthetics, and they're missing some of that crucial training to becoming, the bedside manner, charting, all the things that you learn as a nurse, right? And those are not small things, and so I think a lot of that is, God, I mean, it's now, that said, I think the advertising side of it is not a small part either. I'm curious, has the patient demand side suffered at all? I mean, is there a backlog of that, or is there still a fairly robust patient, treatment side? Or are people getting treated the way they need to at the time they need to?
I'll let you answer that first, because you speak to a lot of injectors from a broader base. I can only speak for myself.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do a lot of private consulting for doctors and nurses all over the world. So I get a pretty nice view of what's happening in different places, and do a bit of consulting work for, various pharma as well. So I do have my finger on the pulse with this. Everyone's feeling it, no matter what part of the industry you're in, whether you're an extremely established provider with a deep database or whether you're just new. Somebody is feeling the pinch of, economic headwinds, every day, every time, every time there's a news story about a war or, something, it has a ripple effect across the economy. And so there's a lot of uncertain consumer confidence, which is making it difficult to predict businesses up until around, I don't know, even before, I guess maybe COVID was kind of the normal before that. You could pretty comfortably predict all the different parts of your business, when you'd be quiet, when you'd be busy. It sort of ran like clockwork. But since then, it's just kind of been very up in the air. Things are sort of moving all the time. We feel like we're in constant flux. So everyone's feeling it. I think that I don't think there's a slowdown in the demand for people wanting treatments. I think what's happened is more providers, so there's more choice. So we've got a process of like a commercial natural selection going on, where people that aren't good, that aren't running good businesses, are slowly finding it more and more difficult and will probably eventually leave or go and work for somebody else. We're seeing that people who still want treatments are potentially stretching them out further between their appointments. They're spending less per session. And then we're just seeing people that maybe who used to get injectables now getting skin treatments instead. So we're seeing a shift from, filler, high filler volumes to, more modest volumes, looking for other skin treatments that they can do. So we've kind of seen a lot of things happening at the same time, and it's affecting everyone. And what it's doing is that it's really showcasing and I guess almost exposing who should be in business and who shouldn't be, and who should be injecting and who shouldn't, because the easy wins are no longer here.
Well, yeah, the easy wins aren't there from the patient perspective, and from in Australia from the marketing perspective either, right? Because you can't do that either. Interesting. I would love to. As I'm sitting here thinking, like the wheels are spinning. Like, what can we teach based upon kind of what you've learned from that? Here. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, my perspective is different, and I don't want to sound like unempathetic to all the injectors listening who are maybe, struggling like what David just said, because I've got an established business, so I'm lucky. My database is pretty deep, and I've got regulars and so on. But I think what David has sort of highlighted is the experienced injectors who maybe take this as seriously as they can. They invest in their education, but also their business skills. They're understanding what they're trying to achieve. They're all over their numbers. They've targeted what maybe their business was weak, so they're sort of plugging those gaps. They're making sure that they are using their database properly by rebooking their patients and reaching out to the people who haven't come, regularly, and all that kind of stuff that a business should be doing, but maybe has been neglected. It's those businesses that will win or survive, in my opinion, because without that, you're just going to fall away because times are difficult at the moment. The one kind of new dynamic that I'm seeing, at least personally, is that people have gone from Googling and looking for the nearest clinic near me and all that kind of slightly more older fashioned way of searching. So they're now using ChatGPT or even Claude or some of the other tools. And weirdly, just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, because I always ask every new patient, where have you come from? How did you hear about me or us? They're all on ChatGPT, and somehow it's, I don't know how, but it's targeting either my clinic or me. And so if the injectors don't fully realize this, they need to work out how to get these tools to start mentioning them. And that means they need to increase their digital footprint. They need to sort out their Google My Business profile. They need to be posting more on Instagram, TikTok. They need to be doing everything, not just one thing, because most people are just leaning on Instagram still. But if they're only doing one thing and that thing isn't leveraging those new customers finding them, they'll just be screaming into the abyss. So somehow we need to lean into, okay, AI is the new thing that our patients are using to find us. How do we get onto AI? And it might be working with your digital marketing manager to start doing blogs, all the things that we've discussed about on the podcast many times before with some of our experts who do that stuff. But it's often the stuff that's ignored because people want to learn how to inject the next new technique, the next new toxin, the next new filler, and they're not focusing on their business, sadly.
Yeah. Maybe just to sort of add on to that, as Jake said, people are very focused on being clinically advanced, knowing all the new things, having the latest toy, new device, new product. I look at a lot of clinic profit and loss statements. First of all, most people don't know how to read basic financials. If you own a business, you need to understand basic financial sort of literacy concepts, like how to read a P&L, how to work out your profit, your break-even point, your gross margins, all that kind of stuff, which is not difficult, but most medical practitioners are petrified of it, and they just don't go down that path. And they were able to get away with not knowing it for a long time because the business has made so much money and your margins are so great. You kind of, in spite of not knowing that, you're still able to do all right. First principles thinking in terms of getting good at the basic treatments, the ones that move the needle the most, getting really good at tox, understanding your anatomy. And the most important thing, other than, making sure you're providing safe treatments, is how to create an experience for your patient, how to do a really, really great consult, how to build rapport, how to develop the relationship, how to make that patient emotionally connected to you. And it sounds really simple, but if it's just people, we're getting lost in the sea of options and products and hype. And for me, it's like focus on the basics, basic financial literacy, great consult, basic good clinical treatments, give your patients the X factor, give them an experience, and just follow the process and be prepared to build your business slowly and sustainably. Those are the messages that I'm preaching to my clients and anyone that will listen. Go back to the basics, get them right, stop focusing on, the small amount of treatments. And, it's like that 80-20 rule, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Alex. Focus on the things that sort of are going to move the needle, keep your patients coming back and giving them the experience that makes them continue to choose you as their provider and tell all their friends and family about.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's what we're talking every day. Like, and it's interesting because the number of, I've been doing this now for going on 20 years, and those first of all, I still don't know what the hell a balance sheet is. Someone's going to have to explain to me what a balance sheet is, because I just don't know. It's like, I can explain it to you, but I don't know what it is. Like, I get it, but I don't get it. I do know what a P&L is though. I figured that part out finally. But gross margin, like why is a gross margin important, like versus what your net margin is? Because people always look at kind of what they're bringing home, but the gross margin is important too. I'm curious, are you bringing all of this to your community in the app, and how can folks navigate that? Like, what's the goal? Because a lot of people want to learn this, but a lot of these providers are also, they're busy. They're not used to doing this kind of thing, and a lot of them don't really want to engage that much in some of the kind of the nitty gritty of the business side. I mean, they'll do it. They say they want to do it, but actually doing it is tough. You got to want it. And so how do you hope to bring kind of this nomenclature and this know-how to the masses, so to speak?
So I guess some history, because when we were doing the app a few weeks, we were running something called Patreon, which I'm sure your North American injectors would have heard. Patreon was a platform where, we can showcase extra stuff outside of our podcast. And we did that for 3, maybe even 4 years. And we recorded, and David especially, we recorded lots of, business coaching or mentoring or insight videos. So breaking all this nomenclature down, talking about P&L, talking about balance sheets, talking about other things like staff problems. How do you deal with a crazy staff member? Or how do you deal with complaints, or all these things that come up as a business that pretty hard to sort of get training on or specific advice for our industry on. So we've lent into all of that. Now, with the app, we haven't sort of fully uploaded our backlog of older videos yet, but there's already stuff there. David's certainly publishing videos every week, and we try to reach out to our members to say, hey, what do you want to learn? Don't just expect us to spoon feed you. We need to know what you want to know, and we're happy to sort of make that material. So yeah, the idea is that we sort of work with our members on the app. They feed back to us, or of course they can share their own stories and insights as well, because there's probably a smaller number of people who are really killing it from the business perspective, but we can learn from those people as well. So the idea is that the community showcases what they do. We obviously provide what we do, and together we all learn, because it's different in different countries, of course.
Yeah, it's basically like a private social media platform for aesthetics. So first of all, the app's free to download. Most of the features that are on the app don't cost you anything. So you can download it, become a free member, get all the free stuff. If you want to become a premium subscriber, you get access to the live chats and the clinical papers and some of the business education. But essentially what we want to try and do is share whatever knowledge Jake and I have, and we do that through feedback, questions that come up. As I said, I'm doing private consulting all the time. So if something comes up in one of my conversations with a client and I go, oh, that'd be interesting for me to tell the community about, there's a lesson here for everyone. Let me post a video on that. Let me provide like yesterday I put something up on dealing with restraints. When someone leaves your business, if they've got a strong social media profile and they've got all of your clients on their data, on their, following them on social media, and they leave and put a story up, doesn't matter what restraint you have. I mean, I'm sure you know this better than I do, Alex, being, a lawyer. Restraints are difficult to enforce. They're expensive, so how do we deal with that ahead of time? So just sort of coming up with hints and tips, but generally just creating a community where people can all learn from each other. We can encourage, we can connect, catch up at, conferences overseas, and really try and cultivate a really positive community that want to help each other, support, and actually carry the industry, not just in Australia, not just in the United States, but internationally elevate it and learn from each other. Because as you said, like we are maybe ahead in some ways, you guys are probably ahead in different ways. There's weird stuff going on in the UK. Europe's a different kettle of fish. Asia's another interesting one. So we're just trying to bring it all together and break down all the borders and allow people to really come together as a community. And, anyone that's an HCP that comes in has to verify themselves, need a copy of their registration. So there's none of this, invisible creepy lurkers. If you're a part of our community, we need to know who you are. You need to show a photo. We want to know all about you, so that we really create a safe space for people to learn from each other. So that's kind of the app in a nutshell, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we initially thought, maybe that's a friction point to sort of do this extra level of checking. But from our perspective, we want to make sure that these are real nurses, doctors, dentists, not, random members of the public trying to learn how to inject.
Or the media.
Or the media, or journalists, or regulators. Like, these people have all got a place. But in our community, we want to be sharing healthcare practitioner, injectable aesthetic knowledge, and obviously business knowledge. And so we do, that extra level maybe sort of limits the amount of numbers we could potentially grow to. We have a far more cohesive community on the app. Yeah.
But it's a international community. What's the breakdown
Yep.
so far? I mean, are you looking
Ooh.
what's how many from the United States versus Australia versus
So
Europe? Any idea?
it's interesting. I mean, I guess we expect it. It completely mirrors our listenership of the podcast. So America is now our biggest audience of the podcast, just ahead of Australia. But that's great for us because obviously it's resonating over there. And it's a similar split on the app. We've got a big number from States, big number for Australia, and then about 10% from UK, about 8 to 6% from Canada, which is exactly the same of our listeners of the podcast, and then a smattering of smaller countries. But the app is very new for us, so that will sort of still
Right.
grow over the next sort of 6 to 12 months. But yeah, we're really happy with it so far.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really cool about that is the interplay and feedback you get with respect to the clinical aspects, complications, right? Dealing with complications, because that's where you're like with Australia, for instance. I mean, the experience with complication management is tremendous, and to be able to do that with all of the treatments and aesthetics, I think has got to be exciting. Are you a little? I'm curious how are you dealing with some of the like peptides and some of the more kind of forward thinking treatments that are maybe not quite legal here yet in America, but are going on in other countries?
Yeah. Interesting. We've actually got a podcast booked in a couple of weeks with a sports doctor. He's not an aesthetic doctor. He's a sports doctor, but he's got a huge amount of experience with peptides. So we're going to tackle that because it's become a really controversial topic.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got compounding pharmacists, you've got the black market, you've got some stuff like I know like things like tesamorelin, for example, is an FDA approved peptide. Then obviously you've got the big one, no pun intended, the GLP-1s, which are a peptide as well. So it's a really interesting space at the moment. So we want to tackle it because we're getting lots of questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the same as the States. It's not regulated. It's currently not. There's no human trials on most of these things that our patients at least are asking for. Yes, there's compounding pharmacies who will happily provide you, and there are doctors scripting. So it's sort of gray because we don't know what isn't allowed or what should or shouldn't happen. We don't understand dosing protocols. All of that stuff, I guess, is the same as American. We're still learning here.
Yeah, it's moving quick.
It is.
Well, the problem is it's the demand, right? It's the trend. Like if the patients weren't demanding, we wouldn't be talking about this, and it would just be another fringe thing that we don't care about. But because wellness and aesthetics is now sort of dovetailed, people want to look good but feel good but grow better and go to the gym, and all this kind of stuff has come to a head. We can't ignore it. We have to, as aesthetic professionals and business people, understand it. Even if we don't supply it, we need to understand how to counsel for it, how to do a consultation, how to give best advice. We can't really ignore it.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
I agree. It's same. I mean, it's become a bit of a hot button topic here because, as I'm sure it is everywhere. One of the other things that we see is that not only do the patients demand it, but a lot of the providers swear by it. They're like, this works. They've done their own kind of studies. There's done clinical studies elsewhere, what humans are not, but they really believe in the treatments. They believe in the efficacy and the way that they impact folks. So it's a lot of the times I hear it's difficult for me not to do it when I know it could help somebody. Right. The counterpoint to that is like, well, that's true, but you still have a little thing called the FDA and all of that. So it's not so easy. I think what worries me, just candidly, and we had a big talk about this at our conference, was not so much the the efficacy or the legality of it. Is that for me it's that aesthetics right now and wellness, we're kind of in a precarious spot as it is, like we were talking about before, where the regulators are looking at us already. And I feel like we've got to be a little careful, and jumping out ahead of the gun and starting to do stuff like this with things that are not approved opens us up for additional criticism. And that's the thing that worries me. It's like, so I'm kind of like, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but like, let's pump the brakes, because this could come, we don't want a law like y'all got in Australia. I think that's on the advertising side. So we want to make sure that we're kind of in control of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, we hosted one of the heads of the regulators, Jason McKayser. I can't remember, maybe a year ago. He was actually really great and transparent and gave us a lot of really interesting information from their perspective of, why are they looking into all this stuff? And he said their 4 current things at the time they were looking into were aesthetics, weight loss medicine, vaping, and cannabis medicine, mainly because all of these 4 things are provided either through telehealth or through slightly grayer sources or compounding pharmacies. Now, peptides wasn't on the radar then. I'm sure it is now, because,
Yes.
It's just become the new thing that in the last 6 months, it's just gone bananas. And again, I don't know whether we should believe the magnitude of how much it's spoken about on social media versus the reality. I don't know. I don't know, but I certainly hear patients talking about it. And like you said, practitioners using it and kind of, in a way, endorsing it, because if they're saying, well, it's good for me, maybe you should try it. Like that sort of endorsement of maybe you should do it, even though we don't have any evidence for it. So it's a bit of a tricky area.
It is. It is. Well, I got to tell you, this is always interesting. I can't wait to hear more about the community. I think everyone should go check it out. Where do they find? So the app, what's the app called again? Is it Inside Aesthetics?
IA Communities. It's sort of born from the Inside Aesthetics podcast. So IA Community is the name of the app. We'll share the links with you, and you can put them in your description, maybe at the bottom of the podcast.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. As Jake said, it's free to download. So, check it out. See if it's for you. If you want to join, the premium tier and become part of the live chats, we'd love to have you as part of the community. But if not, you're happy just to download it and use the features. One of the other things that we do as well is we connect a lot of the industry partners, so like your pharma, your device companies, they've got spaces within our app as well. So if people want to dip in and see what different companies are doing, that's sort of still in its infancy, but we will be growing that. It's done in a nice controlled way where people aren't being harassed. But we want to bring all the different stakeholders together. Even if you're a business owner, you don't have to join the healthcare practitioner part of the app. You can join the business part and get access to all the stuff that I'm doing. So the only stuff that's ring fenced to HCPs only is the stuff where we're talking about scheduled medications or showing before and after photos. But there's a whole lot of great content from a business marketing, financial point of view that you can tap into as well.
Yeah, I don't know if some of the bigger companies listen to your podcast, Alex, but they should get in touch with us, because we'd love to showcase everyone in aesthetics. It's not just practitioners and injectors, like you said. It's companies and businesses and everyone. The idea is that we connect everyone together.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's exciting. And check out the podcast too, because I know you guys have a ton of really cool guests, and again, it's international, I think, which is always exciting. You get to hear a lot of. For us, it's we get very insulated here in the States, and it's all just kind of it's very kind of like kinetic here, but like there's so much going on. And with medical spas, it's different. Like as plastic surgeons and derms, they have international conferences. We don't as much. You've got to be kind of top tier trainer or one of those to kind of get out. So I think a lot of folks need some exposure to that, and I think that'll be cool as well to get. So check out the Inside Aesthetics podcast. Check out the app. Both of you have a wealth of information. I appreciate you joining. There's also a great book on KKR too, if you want to read it. I'm not sure what it's called.
Yeah, it's called. It's called. I can tell you what it's called. It's called Barbarians at the Gate.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's aptly
the clues in the name.
Well, thank you for hosting us or me. I really appreciate it. It's good to sort of be the other end of the mic on occasion and share our thoughts.
And by the way, if you ever want to get the founder of Laser Clinics on your podcast, I'm sure I could facilitate that if you're interested. He's an interesting, wild guy, very bigger than life. So I'm sure you'll have a good chat. So if you want to go into that story better.
Story. Let's get you both on. We'll tell some stories and get to the bottom of this.
Yeah. If you've watched The Wolf of Wall Street, there are some stories in there that mimic the early days of Laser Clinics Australia.
I have no doubt about it. I have no doubt. But probably some really good fun stories, and probably some things that you just shake your head at and you're like, oh yeah, probably not the best idea.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks again.
I'll thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
See you later. Bye.
Thanks, Alex. Cool. How was that?
Thank you to our producer, Madeline Moeller, marketing content coordinator, who organizes the podcast schedule and guests and provides topics and talking points. Audio and video editing, voiceover, graphics, and platform management is provided by myself, Derek Hawk, digital marketing supervisor. Our theme is provided by Maka Music. Thank you for watching or listening to the Medical Spa Insider podcast. Please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future episodes. Ratings and reviews are greatly appreciated. For more information about the American Med Spa Association, visit americanmedspa.org. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by AmSpa. Views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance in the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity that they represent. AmSpa provides this podcast as a local service for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues. And as always, thank you for listening to the Medical Spa Insider. Remember, compliance is cool.